The world of Game of Thrones is built on power, loyalty, betrayal, and survival, but few characters embody the manipulation of these forces as completely as Petyr Baelish, better known as Littlefinger. While many players in Westeros seek control through armies, bloodlines, or brute force, Littlefinger operates in a different realm entirely. He thrives in instability. He cultivates it. And more importantly, he depends on it. To understand the real reason Littlefinger loved chaos, you have to look beyond his schemes and examine the foundation of who he was, where he came from, and how he learned to navigate a world that never intended to give him power. Littlefinger's story begins not as a lord of great standing, but as an outsider. Born into a minor house with little influence, he grew up without the advantages that defined most of the nobility around him. In a society where lineage determined destiny, Petyr Baelish had almost nothing. This early disadvantage shaped his worldview. He saw clearly that the traditional systems of order in Westeros were not designed for people like him to succeed. Honor, loyalty, and tradition were tools used by the powerful to maintain their dominance. For someone like Littlefinger, playing by those rules meant remaining insignificant forever. Instead of accepting his place, he studied the system. He observed how the great houses operated, how alliances were formed, and more importantly, how they fell apart. From a young age, he understood that stability benefited those already in power, while instability created opportunities for those clever enough to exploit it. Chaos was not just destruction in his eyes, it was a ladder. It allowed someone without status to climb by disrupting the structures that kept them down. This philosophy becomes clearer when looking at his early relationship with Catelyn Stark. His love for her was genuine in his youth, but it also revealed something deeper about his character. When he was humiliated and cast aside, it wasn't just a personal loss. It was a harsh reminder of his position in the social hierarchy. He was not considered worthy, regardless of his feelings or abilities. That rejection hardened him. It pushed him further away from any belief in fairness or honor. From that point on, Littlefinger stopped seeing the world as something to belong to, and started seeing it as something to manipulate. By the time the events of Game of Thrones unfold, Littlefinger has already begun to put his philosophy into action. His role in orchestrating the conflict between the Starks and the Lannisters is one of the clearest examples of his love for chaos. He doesn't simply react to events, he creates them. By betraying Ned Stark, he ensures that the fragile balance of power in King's Landing collapses. This is not a reckless decision. It is calculated. He understands that once the realm is thrown into conflict, the established order will weaken, and in that weakness he can rise. What makes Littlefinger unique is that he rarely commits to one side. While others declare loyalty and fight for a cause, he remains flexible. Chaos allows him to shift alliances as needed, always positioning himself where the advantage lies. Stability would force him to choose a side and limit his options, but instability keeps every path open. This adaptability is one of his greatest strengths, and it only works in a world that is constantly changing. Another key aspect of Littlefinger's relationship with chaos is control. At first glance, chaos seems unpredictable and dangerous, but for Littlefinger, it is something he believes he can manage. He doesn't create random disorder. He engineers specific situations that appear chaotic to others but follow a logic he understands. This gives him an edge. While everyone else is reacting to crises, he is often the one who set them in motion. He thrives in environments where others are confused or overwhelmed, because that is where his careful planning gives him the most power. His rise to Lord of the Vale is a perfect example of this. By manipulating Lisa Arryn and orchestrating her death, he removes a key obstacle while securing control over a strategically important region. Again, this is not an act of blind ambition. It is a move that only works because the realm is already in turmoil. In a stable system, such a bold maneuver would be nearly impossible. But in the chaos of war and political fragmentation, it becomes achievable. Littlefinger's manipulation of Sansa Stark further illustrates his mindset. He sees in her both a tool and an opportunity. By aligning himself with her, he gains a connection to the North and positions himself closer to greater power. At the same time, he attempts to shape her into someone who understands and adopts his way of thinking. He teaches her in his own way that the world is not governed by fairness, but by strategy and perception. His influence on her shows that his love of chaos is not just about personal gain. It is a worldview he believes in deeply enough to pass on. However, Littlefinger's reliance on chaos also reveals a critical flaw. While he believes he can control the disorder he creates, chaos by its nature is difficult to contain. As the series progresses, the consequences of his actions become harder to predict. The War of the Five Kings, the shifting alliances, and the rise of new powers all contribute to a world that is increasingly unstable. In such an environment, even someone as skilled as Littlefinger can lose control. This ultimately leads to his downfall. In Winterfell, he attempts to manipulate Sansa and Arya Stark against each other, believing he can once again create a situation that benefits him. But this time his understanding of the players is flawed. Sansa has grown beyond his expectations, and Arya operates on a level of unpredictability that even he cannot fully grasp. The chaos he tries to create turns against him. Instead of dividing his enemies, it unites them. His death is significant because it highlights the limits of his philosophy. For most of his life, chaos was indeed a ladder that allowed him to climb higher than anyone could have expected. But it was never a stable foundation. It required constant manipulation, constant awareness, and constant control. The moment he miscalculates, the system he relied on collapses. The real reason Littlefinger loved chaos then is rooted in both necessity and belief. It was necessary because it was the only way for someone of his background to gain power in a rigid hierarchical society. But it also became a belief because it worked. Time and time again he saw that disrupting order gave him an advantage. It reinforced his view that stability was an illusion maintained by those in power, and that true influence came from understanding how to break that illusion. At the same time, his love of chaos reflects a deeper psychological element. It gave him a sense of control in a world that had once rejected him. By pulling the strings behind major events, he transformed from an outsider into one of the most influential figures in Westeros. Chaos was not just a tool, it was a way for him to redefine his place in the world. It allowed him to rewrite the rules that had once limited him. In many ways, Littlefinger represents a different kind of villain. He is not driven by conquest or destruction for its own sake. He is driven by opportunity. He doesn't seek to burn the world down, but he is willing to destabilize it if it means advancing his position. This makes him more subtle but also more dangerous. His actions often go unnoticed until their consequences become unavoidable. What makes his story compelling is how closely it ties into the broader themes of Game of Thrones. The series repeatedly shows that power is not just about strength or heritage, but about perception, timing, and strategy. Littlefinger embodies these ideas more than almost any other character. He understands that the game is not won by following the rules, but by reshaping them. Yet his downfall also reinforces another key theme, that no strategy is foolproof. The same chaos that allowed him to rise ultimately contributes to his fall. It creates variables he cannot control and introduces players he cannot fully predict. In the end, his belief in his own ability to manage chaos becomes his greatest weakness. Looking back at his journey, it becomes clear that Littlefinger's love of chaos was never random or reckless. It was calculated, deliberate, and deeply tied to his identity. It was born out of exclusion, refined through observation, and validated by success. But like any strategy taken to its extreme, it carried inherent risks. Littlefinger's story is a reminder that power gained through manipulation is often unstable. It requires constant maintenance and leaves little room for error. While chaos can create opportunities, it can also destroy the very structures that support those opportunities. In trying to control everything, Littlefinger ultimately loses everything. And that is the real tragedy of his character. He was one of the smartest players in the game, someone who understood the system better than most. But his reliance on chaos, the very thing that made him powerful, also ensured that his position would never be secure. In a world where every move creates new consequences, even the best strategist can be undone. In the end, Littlefinger didn't just love chaos because it helped him rise. He loved it because it was the only world in which he could truly exist as a powerful man. But that same world was always destined to consume him. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mind of Littlefinger and the true reason he thrived in chaos, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stick around for more breakdowns of the strategies, secrets, and hidden motives that shaped the world of Game of Thrones.